Mind. This is Vinny. Today we have a returning guest, Dr. Gregg Henriques. We had Greg on about 10 episodes ago. In fact, I think he did our first podcast actually. He and I have been in contact, and he had sent out an article by Peter Limberg and Conor Barnes, in which they discuss. Actually, let me get the title. The title of the article is "The Memetic Tribes of Culture War 2.0: How Their Rise Made Infighting the Norm and How We Can Navigate the Resulting Culture War." For me, the term culture war was just kind of a buzzwordy thing you hear kind of thrown out there in the news, and you kind of see, a lot of the feeds, whether it's Twitter or Facebook, whatever it is, just talking about that. And it never really rang true to me what it really was. And I think this article did a great job of first of all introducing the concept, and then also in the genesis of what quote unquote a culture war is, and in the inception of the term from Pat Buchanan at the Republican National Convention back in the early 90s, and really defined and quantified that was culture war 1.0, which was really left versus right, Democratic versus Republican. It was a two-sided system with more or less a binary distribution of viewpoints and tribes, if you will. There were two main camps. Now you come full circle to our current day, which the article term dubs culture war 2.0, and it's much more complicated than that. It's not a binary problem anymore. It's much more complex. And we'll really dig into that. So again, I think the article did a fantastic job of articulating a lot of the phenomenon that caused that have been in place to allow the evolution of this next generation of culture war, and we really dig into that as well. So anyway, with that, I think let's just jump in. Give you Dr. Gregg Henriques. Hey, my first reoccurring guest. A returning guest, I should say.
All right. Well, that makes me feel special, right? On a good way to start Father's Day here.
That's right. Well, happy Father's Day. That's right. I almost forgot about that.
Thank you. Amen.
Well, thanks for doing this again. I appreciate it. Really do.
Absolutely. Happy to do so.
Yeah. So culture wars, huh? So you sent out that link, and to be honest, I started. I didn't even know what the hell the word culture war really meant. The phrase, right? I mean,
okay.
I know. You've heard it on the mainstream news, from the Pat Buchanan days, right? That's kind of where it originated, and the article really summarizes it as culture war 1.0.
Yes.
And I know Bill O'Reilly had a whole culture war segment. I know even that's more on the right. I think MSNBC on the left had a culture wars shows, and so I never really dug into it. It just never really registered to me. So this article was for me was fantastic. It did a really good job of just summarizing what culture wars are, what they've been, and now what they're becoming, which is pretty cool. So,
yeah. So it might be even that's a great place to start for the audience, just to get clear about what it is.
Yeah. I mean, you want to summarize what your take is on what it was 1.0 versus 1.2.0?
Yeah. So if we start with the culture war within the United States in particular, although certainly, so we're going to contextualize that. We'll be talking about that level of culture, although I think it's applicable to a lot of different domains. So if you think about politics, I like to divide politics up the left-right political spectrum into three broad categories. So one of the categories is economics and government. Like, what's your philosophy of the economy? Are you more free market? Are you more big government, kind of socialist? That's one dimension. Right. Another dimension is our identity as a nation in relationship to other nations. That is, what's our international attitude? Are we more hawkish or dovish, or what do we see in terms of the international scale? And both of those are important, but probably the biggest and most important political dimension is really this culture, sociocultural identity dimension. And really that is where the culture wars were located. So it really is about the values and identity and social structure of the United States in terms of what we should be committing to. And the culture war 1.0 was really then this distinction between historically then the religious right and indeed sort of Jerry Falwell, if you know Jerry Falwell from a Baptist fundamentalist who led the moral majority in the 1980s. And that was the claim that we needed to return to the tenets of Christianity and to embrace all of the values and ideas, and that this is a Christian nation, and endowed by a creator with various elements, and this is what we need to be. And then that would be the center of the right side of the culture war. And then that was then defined against a much more secular, open, global way of thinking in terms of emphasizing diversity, being concerned about the patriarchy in terms of when you do conservative values. It's like, well, it's values of white men, white Christian men who have had power. And so the left then was very much about breaking down that and creating a much more diverse vision for our values. And that's much more cosmopolitan. So yeah, Pat Buchanan captured that and was certainly a warrior in the culture wars on the right. And so for the 1980s into the 1990s, and maybe certainly even up to 2010, our society could be, certainly this is the argument of what the paper was about, or at least the argument the paper made, is really a bipolar, kind of like the Cold War was U.S. and Soviet Union. This is the really two camps here. There's the secular, global, cosmopolitan left, and then there's the religious, socially conservative right. Certainly that's the dichotomy that I grew up on. And then the idea really is that since 2010s, in this decade, that bipolar war has changed dramatically, and certainly really catapulted with Trump's election, really transformed the field of belief value networks, so that we now broke sort of this tradition of these two camps and really started fracturing them across many, many different many different memeplexes, to use the term from the article. A meme, and we can get into what that is, but basically it's a constellation of beliefs and values about how to see the world and what's important and what you advocate for. And so instead of two big systems that had lots of little systems underneath them, now those little systems, the two big ones in many ways have come down, and now it's just a multiplicity of different ones, and they're fighting with each other in much more direct ways in the past. And I can give a lot of examples as to how certainly I'm seeing that reality, but that's the basic shift, that we went from a bipolar war between the old left and right based on these social identity values. And now those things have sort of broken down. And now we just see a multiplicity of different tribes that are at war with each other across a very, very rocky, fragmented landscape of opinion.
Yeah, so as I was reading, and just a quick step back, because you mentioned the memeplex. So I have three definitions here that I just want to read off to give folks a little context. There's that in these phrases were pretty much I would say scattered throughout the document here. So a meme, right? In my opinion, before reading this, I never dug into what a meme actually was. I think most of us think it's a funny picture with a funny quote.
That's right. No, that's what it is in this day and age.
And I don't know who actually coined the term or defined it officially back in the day, but I just had here a unit of information that wants to replicate itself. Right.
And then it was Richard Dawkins, who's a famous evolutionary biologist, and he used the term meme to rhyme with gene as a unit of culture. So he had the idea that maybe there would be these units of culture that would replicate themselves, that would be analogous to the way genes replicate themselves in the world of biology.
Oh, funny. I didn't know it was Dawkins, because I actually took a note as I was reading through this. It was like, and then just because carrying on to a memeplex, it's groups of memes that have teamed up, likely to help themselves replicate better, right?
Exactly.
So I was thinking, okay, this is very analogous to evolution and adaptation, and entities wanting to survive. So it makes sense that it was a Dawkins thing. And then finally, memetic tribes. So building, right, memeplex and then memetic tribes. Now these are just groups of people becoming tribal around memeplexes, right?
Exactly. And so if you use my system, this thing I built is called the tree of knowledge system. And essentially what it says, the key kind of meme that's really important for culture is a justification. A justification is a propositional statement about the world, what it is and what it ought to be. And then they collect into larger scale justification systems. And that's really what a memeplex would be, is an interlocking network of beliefs and values that legitimize key aspects of the world and then legitimize key aspects of the way the world ought to be.
Right. Yeah. So, and as I was reading through it, I started, my mind immediately went to, and again, I was reading this in real time. I didn't read it through and then throw my ideas on paper. So I was kind of putting, just stream of conscious notes, on paper as I was writing this, as I was reading, excuse me. And the first thing I started thinking about is the internet, social media. I'm like, isn't this the reason? Isn't this the reason? And obviously it really dug into that in the article. So I was like, okay, at least I'm getting the general gist here. But in my head, what I was kind of thinking was what the article referred to as digital tribes, meaning just groups of people that find each other online and via shared interests and beliefs, and I think the article, coined that group of folks as more pacifist, tribes, right? Memetic tribes, I guess, are now they take it to the next level where they're now warring against each other. So it's almost like digital tribes plus the warring aspect is this memetic tribe concept. So I guess the first question I have is what caused that shift, right? I had another podcast where I was, discussing with someone, you would think the introduction of the internet, we're all connected. The concept of the other would slowly break down, and we'd realize we all have, a lot of common interests and the general, least common denominator that across all of humanity would become more apparent, and we would just get along better, to put it simply. And maybe that was what the digital tribe, concept checked off. But then we jump to this memetic tribe where we start warring immediately. Now, is that just human nature, or is there other forces at play there?
Well, it's a great question. We probably should break it down into a number of pieces here. So let's go back to the digital tribe, because that makes a very important basic point. And the basic point that the digital tribe emphasizes, or just the word digital really, is one that I would hone in on. And that is that we are going through a very, very important technological revolution. And very similar to like when the printing press, and maybe even more dramatic than the printing press. The printing press over a couple of 100 years completely changed society, right? Because of the technology, and then all of a sudden people were reading, and then you could share so much different information. So the printing press afterwards, people were different. Well, this is like printing press squared. Okay, in terms of the internet and artificial intelligence and computing. It's just a dramatic change to the entire landscape of what we can do and how we do it. So obviously one of the things that it does is it creates this enormous opportunity for interconnection. So, and you were saying, well, gosh, now we can meet virtually anybody, anywhere. We can share a huge amount of information. We can create new networks and connections. And so that just, that playing field, that landscape, we are a product. As much as we're a product of our nature, we're a product of the environment that we find ourselves in. And we have created a radically new environment here. Sure. So that means a lot of changes are going to take place in terms of how we even fundamentally even organize ourselves. The mediums that we use really fundamentally change our forms. And so our forms are changing. And I think digital tribe's a great description. So all the people who were doing this sort of cutting edge on the technology and then starting to use this technology, like the Facebooks or any other number of ways in which people could connect through the internet, they would be defined initially by the nature of the technology and create a community that way. Right. But now, as the internet sort of has, really become the platform for communication and the exchange of ideas and really the control of the flow of information, it's really, the internet will now be the structure that binds us on this new landscape and playing field. And now as we've entered into this, there are a lot of things that are causing a massive shift then in our old structures, the old structures that used to maintain the post-industrial society that we lived in. are breaking down, and I'll be talking about that. But because they're being replaced and transformed, so there's the technological structural element of that revolution, which then changes our forms, which changes things like, so for example, I mean, when we used to be anchored in the world, the idea of a nation was really bounded. You were then bounded inside that nation in terms of space and time, and all of that. And now with the internet, that those boundaries radically change. And so certainly a lot of people thought, this would be an unbelievable global cosmopolitan thing, because like you said, we would just connect with everybody across the world. And then whenever you connect with people, don't prejudices and discrimination go down? And the answer to that question is actually not necessarily.
Yeah, that's,
okay.
that's proving itself out for sure.
A lot of the time, in fact, we know from the whole segregation, and social psychologists did an enormous amount of work, and they said, yeah, actually, you just put people together in certain situations. You put people together, and you get a lot more violence and differentiation and competition and breakdown and hostility. So it really depends on how people are put together, and then what are they, and whether or not, fundamentally, to what extent do they share similar values and have similar goals? And to the extent that they share different values and have antithetical goals, and you put them together, well, then you get a lot of animosity and acrimony and hostility, and everybody gets all pissed off at one another. And so what we're seeing emerge, in my opinion, what you're seeing emerge is once the digital landscape got laid out, and now this is like the new territory for defining kind of who we are and who has attention to give rise to what it is that we are going to be doing and what's important. Okay, so now you have that landscape, and now then people are voicing, hey, so now you get a competition to grab attention on the landscape and try to articulate what is right, what is good, what is true. Okay. And that's really what that transition from digital tribe to memetic tribe is about, is that the focus wasn't just the technology. Now the recognition is the technology is the landscape that we now want to control. Okay. Right. So that's one. And then you have to understand what's happening to our society and what's been happening to our society really since the 1950s. And really, this is, by society here, I actually mean the Western society in particular. I mean, the entire West. Okay. And the entire West is going through what John Verricky calls a meaning crisis. Okay. We're in the age of a meaning crisis. And what that means is, and it does relate, by the way, to the digital age at the level of technology, but there's also stuff going on at the level of knowledge that is important to us to understand. And what's happened at the level of knowledge, and what I mean by knowledge, I mean the institutional structures of understanding. And so science would be a domain of knowledge, and religion would be a domain of knowledge, and national identity potentially be a domain of knowledge. So what we are seeing in the meaning crisis is that all the modern institutions that, say, in the 1950s were shared as holding reality and holding meaning and being understandable, and we can have then a shared sense of, yes, this is what's right and wrong, and this is what science says, and religion was still holding on a little bit. But really, from the 1950s on, there have been a series of developments that have moved us into a postmodern state of knowledge. Okay, you may have heard the term postmodernism. Sure. It's have you heard that term?
Oh yeah, yep.
Yeah. Okay. So
certainly define it for the listeners. That, I mean, because that's, again, it's a term that a lot of folks have heard a million times, but probably never put an actual clear definition behind. So
exactly. So what it refers to, modern, and when we're talking about the nature of knowledge, modern is really is from the Enlightenment, and the idea of a modernist approach to knowledge is that you can build accurate understandings of the world, that we can develop truth, that there's a shared general understanding that we can believe in with good justification. Okay. Postmodern is basically the idea of there is no real independent standing point. Everything is embedded in a socio-cultural, linguistic narratives frame. And you basically, the claim there is depending on what stance you're making. But I'm going to make it descriptively. And what that means is that I think it's essentially a fact that we are living through a period of time that's well described as postmodern. So rather than making any philosophical claims, I'm just making a descriptive claim. Look, all we are seeing here is a fragmented pluralism of language systems and games. Language games is a term a philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein used. And basically it's like, hey, how do you make sense out of the world? How do you talk about stuff? How do you get stuff done? Well, what we're seeing is the old traditions, which organize people, they're really breaking down. And everyone's losing faith in all the old systems. They're not capable of holding the complexity. And so what's happening is those things break down, then they create a huge vacuum of understanding. Right. And it is that vacuum that in terms of the culture war in the United States from 1 to 2 really it's a reflection of a vacuum of meaning. Nobody knows what the hell to believe anymore. And then as those things break down, now all of a sudden, now you have the internet, and it's this open landscape. And now people are trying to gain attentional control with what they see to be important. And the old systems have broken down. Now all of a sudden you just get this population of meme plexes, these justification systems where people are saying, oh my gosh, this is the way to go. Right. This is absolutely what we have to do. And now, so it's this fragmented landscape of all different kinds of tribes battling against one another. At least that's the Peter Limberg, and Conor Barnes, I think. They're the authors of that paper. But that's one way of describing what it is that they laid out.
And it sounds like you sort of summarize the first phenomenon as they lay out 6 phenomena that really causing this, right? And,
absolutely.
And the first one, just to title it off, was called secularization and the meaning crisis, right? The meaning crisis weakened our collective understanding of what ought to be, and I think that's what you just articulated. And if in my head, and I put some notes here, just saying, well, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, we had the Bible, right? We had a country. We didn't really, and maybe there was, I'm sure there were other belief systems, but generally speaking, we had, we did not interact with other cultures nearly as much. And I'm saying the we meaning the United States, just to keep it simple, and that could maybe extrapolate to other cultures.
Perfect. But I think that's right.
Right. And then so we had a common guidepost, right? We called it the Bible. There was there was fractions within that. There was plenty of disagreements on what the certain things in the Bible said, and you get the Protestants, Catholics, you got all the denominations, but generally the main, I would say we had a common guidepost.
That's right.
And it seems like you articulated so well that that guidepost has been losing popularity, just to say it simply, and then the rise of science, the rise of the internet. I look at it as, I just imagine a bunch of children almost thrown out into the world too soon. A bunch of 6-year-olds going, what the heck's that thing? That's a plane. Is that a plane? Why is that thing flying? Or, just looking at the world and not really getting it because it's a whole new landscape, and we're trying to put meaning to everything. And hence what you said, enter memes and enter, memetic tribes. And it's a little scary. But it's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, no, I actually, certainly, the crises that are listed, I think they listed 6 of them, and they started rightly, in my assessment, with the meaning crisis. I think we are going through a very important and very scary time. My assessment is that this may end up very, very well this time. It may end up very, very poorly. In other words, I think we're in a very, very important flux point that may turn out to be the best of times, or that may turn out to be the worst of times. So one of the things that gets me, why I'm super obsessed and passionate about what I'm doing, is I think that people are aware. I think a lot of people can really feel this. Everyone I talk to can really feel at some level of intuition that things are confusing, that we're really in kind of an age of confusion. We don't really know what's going on, that a lot of different things are happening, and what's going to happen has an outcome range that's very large, from very good to very bad. That's certainly my sense. And that meaning crisis is absolutely, and your point about the religion, that's 100% true. The old religious establishments, in the academic field with the Enlightenment, religion has been under attack, and losing credibility, certainly, really since Newton, and certainly since, the 19th century. But it really was, it's the populace in the middle of the 20th century that really starts to make the secular turn. So that these things often take a little while to move from sort of
Right. And
academic understanding.
this is somewhere the traditionalists would say, and I'd be lying if I didn't say I have a toe on this side of the fence as well, where the traditionalists would say, well, that's why moving away from God is going to cause chaos, right? And
Absolutely.
And he's like, he gave us a guidepost, he gave us a blueprint. Why we're witnessing that walk away from that guidepost. So it's almost
Absolutely.
like,
And I completely agree with that, by the way. I think that science is a bad system for meaning making. Science, or at least certainly the way it was framed in Enlightenment 1.0, is very dangerous in many ways to the human meaning making project. So science, framed as it was in what I call Enlightenment 1.0, really is very dangerous, and basically having people say, whoa, in fact, I was just having a conversation with my family about this. We all got together, and I have a nephew who is Andrew, who's, I think he's going to be a philosophy major, and he's a freshman. And he learned about determinism and essentially the message, well, we're just a bunch of physical atoms bouncing around at base. And, that's all we are. And we can pretend that there's meaning, but really all we are is just a bunch of atoms bouncing around. That's not my view, but it is something that a lot of people that adopt, and to me there are a lot of dangers in that view at multiple levels.
But that's interesting. I assume that's we spoke last time. I mean, again, like I said, you did my first podcast, but you described yourself as an agnostic atheist. What was your exact self-proclaim? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
I'm an agnostic atheist. And then really, I'm actually interested in a religious movement that's starting by Alexander Bard called syntheism, which is a post-atheistic way of viewing the world. We could certainly get into that, but what it says fundamentally is that what I've always believed is that we need a holistic philosophy that combines the best of science with the best of humanistic values and moral meaning making. And we need a synthetic philosophy that does that. And Enlightenment 1.0 only really cuts science off, and it has an overly physicalist a set of assumptions, meaning that it does reduce to matter in a way that I think is just wrong. It's not the right model for understanding the universe. And so, we need I believe that. So I'm a critic of sort of Enlightenment 1.0 science only kind of views. And I think they, like my nephew, God love him. We really do need deep meaning making systems. And I'm seeking ways to how to justify that and ground that in some really sophisticated ways of understanding. And I believe that's very possible.
Now, and I took a note here when we talk with the first phenomenon, the secularism, and the meaning crisis. How do we prevent moral relativism and everyone or every human being on earth just claiming what is good and what is right? That's what I've always struggled with when you lose that one centralized flag in the ground saying this is what is and this is what ought to be. What's in place to prevent that, or is preventing that even not something we should be too worried about?
No, I think I absolutely agree. That's one of my big criticisms of sort of one of the things about physicalism is that it then leaves you with that problem, and then you sort of then default to moral relativism. And then if you just have a general moral relativism, that's also that's really tragic. And deeply, in my opinion, deeply problematic and misguided at multiple levels. So here's the way. So you ask a great question in this debate. This is part of what gives rise to the meaning crisis, of course, right. Is exactly, well, okay, if we all agree and, we have our Christian Bible and we believe that God, is real and he informs the universe, and that gives rise to an absolutist version of good and bad. This is not something that you construct. This is something that goes into the nature of the universe. And indeed, I think that's a very that has a lot of positives when you do it. Now, I'm an agnostic atheist, so you get into. I also really believe in intellectual integrity, and so I've engaged in public debates with some of my neighbors. I live in a rural. With one of my neighbors, we had a high school who was a young Earth creationist. He believed in the literal interpretation of the Bible, and that Adam and Eve were real entities that happened about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. And I'm like, no, really, all right, I get your argument, and and he has his reasons for that.
Tell me you recorded
my
it.
analysis. What's
Tell
that?
me you recorded that one.
Yeah, we recorded it, and about 150 people came, and interesting, about 70% were with his view, and 30% were with mine, and both before and after, those views pretty much stayed the same. But my view really is, no, that's not really a just sophisticated or justified view. And so then you get into how do you really make sense out of this? And I really think, I don't know if you know Jordan Peterson at all.
Oh yeah,
yep. He certainly, of course, wrestles with this stuff. And I really do believe that the mythos of the Bible has an enormous number of things to tell us, and very, very important things about our psychology. And we better pay attention to those. In fact, I named the system I built the tree of knowledge, and the extension of it, the garden of Atua. Those are very much references to the need for a meaning-making philosophy system that really speaks to the religious side of our experience, the mystery, the intuition, the holistic thinking, the moral commitments. I really think that's essential. So I could go on. I'll pause there, see if you want to pick up. We can talk about how I make sense and get out of the moral relativist view of the world. But I do think it's a real problem, and certainly a lot of people end up adopting that. And I think that's part of our meaning crisis, is that we don't know how to ground our moral view of the world.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a good jumping off point, I think. But we can, I think that's a title for a podcast in and of itself, more relativism, and because it is underpinning a lot of these issues for sure. And that's the one thing I keep going back with, where everything seems to be making sense until I get to that point where I say, well, then who the heck is who's defining good or bad or just good enough or whatever? So. Anyway, so we touched on secularism. The next thing was, in this article, was fragmentation, the reality crisis. Really, our collective understanding of what is. So first, we talked about we have a problem defining what ought to be. Right, the Bible goes away, and everyone's trying to define what should be, what's good, what should we be doing. The next thing is it's a fractured understanding of what actually is.
Exactly. Perfect. Yep. Yeah. And both of these together really do, in my mind, constitute the meaning crisis, but one of them represents the breakdown of our religious moral structure, and turns that into moral relativism. The second one represents the breakdown of both synthetic philosophy. So what is synthetic philosophy? Synthetic philosophy was the old task of philosophers who were trying to develop these grand systems. And Hegel is a famous philosopher in the 19th century, and he was pretty successful at doing one in Germany. That's an example. And for 50 to 70 years or so, his system really dominated the entire German intellectual enterprise. But ultimately, if you follow the history of philosophy, those systems break down, and you enter into post 1950s into 1960s, the actual postmodern phase in philosophy, where they're not advocating, by the way, nobody in philosophy advocates for a purely relativistic view of knowledge that says, well, anyone's knowledge is as good as anybody else's. That sounds absurd, and it is absurd, and no sophisticated person advocates for that. But sophisticated people do say that you cannot develop a single synthetic view of knowledge. And in fact, philosophy basically decided that was impossible, and really stopped interest in grand meaning-making systems. So there really was a break in that effort, and it was essentially an attitude of the professionals that effort was not going to be successful. Okay. And so philosophers, anybody that would then say you can develop a large-scale, big theory of knowledge that does the task of what Hegel wanted or any of the other old synthesizers is misguided. And if you ask the vast majority of philosophers today, and they gave up on that project. Another thing that happened in relationship to that, and I think connected to that, is that science lost its connection to philosophy. Okay. Science originally was a branch of philosophy called natural philosophy. And when it was grounded in natural philosophy, it was connected to sort of the large scale structures of understanding. For example, like the great chain of being. The great chain of being is the basic understanding that you go from sort of matter into life and into, in fact, I certainly believe this up to a point, and then ultimately you have humans on one level and then angels and then God. Somebody like Newton would have had a great chain of being understanding of the world. But that all broke down also. Science became increasingly empirical in terms of a whole bunch of different assumptions, and really it lost its big picture view. In fact, so really science then fragments and really is sort of like the collection of topics, a collection of findings, a collection of experts that debate about particular findings, but there's no big picture understanding of science. So if philosophy is breaking down and science is fragmenting completely, then this question of what is, like, what are we actually ultimately grounding our understanding? What is fact? Well, there you go. It depends on where you end. And, yeah.
Yeah, no, the fake news thing, and I think the example they gave is, pre-Cultural War 2.0, you had newspapers, you had television, and even more modern. You'd have MSNBC on the left, Fox News on the right. Everybody before the internet, you kind of could watch. It's one reality and then two different spins on reality, just to simplify it.
That's right.
Right, and now they think the example they gave is now we basically have Netflix. And that, for me, that example rang true. I mean, I'm addicted to Netflix documentaries, and just so you just see the content, and between that and Amazon Prime, and everything's just streaming from unlimited data in the sky. To keep it simply, you can just get any reality you want, whatever you want to.
Right. So let's how about we just link what you're saying with what I'm saying. Yeah. So at an abstract knowledge level, there's a breakdown. Then you have this technological explosion, right, that allows people access to all sorts of different things. And you have these institutions that are breaking down. So voila, yes, the landscape frees up and the shared understanding of reality breaks down. And you get a flood of information across all of these different that are then grounded in different biased perspectives and then in different groups. And that just adds to this fragmented reality. What is bullshit? That's a technical term, by the way, that we talked about. So it's this, and indeed that's part of the meaning crisis that John Vervaeke talks about, is sort of like we're surrounded in bullshit too, because now the flood of information is also overwhelming. So these all interact. So yes, the reality crisis is connected to the meaning crisis. Is more on the question of what is, but that's also pervasively now uncertain.
Yeah, and going back to the bullshit thing, I mean, between image editing, and this what scares me. Image manipulation has been around for quite a while. Video and speech manipulation now is getting easier and easier with these deep fakes. I don't know if you checked any of this stuff out online, but
of course,
it
absolutely.
Is just, I mean,
well, it came right to my mind when we watched. Of course, obviously, you may have seen the tanker explosions, right? And the United States making their claims and showing a video, right? So actually the first thing that entered my mind when I saw that video, not that I don't follow a lot of conspiracies, but immediately was this video generation thing, right? Now talk about how you can manipulate stuff. It's one thing when, was it Jordan Peele was doing Barack Obama, and we can say, well, okay, well, we know Barack Obama and, we can check out that. Right. But these kinds of like espionage kinds of issues, now somebody can generate an espionage video, right? Yep. And that's just make it claim that it's real. How would you possibly know if the CIA or something was was evil in that regard? It's just a really scary thing. Absolutely.
Yeah, if folks don't know, I would check it. Just Google deep fakes and just look at some of the how easy it is. You can download open source free software today and just tweak almost any video and the algorithms are smart enough to if someone's saying, I don't know, I love carrots, and you want to change it to them saying, I hate carrots, right? There's almost nothing you have to do. You just type in a new word. It'll understand the cadence of the person's voice. It'll analyze the lip movements, how to say carrots versus or hate versus love, and it'll do it for you. And it's at this point, it's almost indiscernible to the human eye, and they're only getting better. So I'm going to be
Jeez.
honest, that scares the hell out of me. And how
It
do you
should.
keep the bad actors? I mean, it's and the problem with that is, I'm in technologies. That's my day job, but what technology brings us is brilliant, and we don't want to stop that. But the bad actors now have access to this, and it's like, man, I just feel like this such an amount of burden put on all of us to discern through the from the real between the real and the fake, and I just don't know if most folks have time, and I'm just afraid where it's going to go. But I don't know.
Right. Well, your point about bad actors, I hope we mention that, because this issue of value, and how do we, if we're going to make the transition in a positive way, somehow we really have to rise above all these memetic tribes, and do need to find some universal values. That's what I'm a moral universalist. I care about moral values at a universal level. Man, yeah, we somehow have to create a culture where the number of bad actors are significantly less than the number of good actors. Right. And that's, and somehow we have to create a culture, an ethical culture that really cultivates people wanting to be a good actor. So that's what, I'm glad you mentioned that term, because that's a real concern of mine too, because we get too many bad actors in this landscape. 1984 was a brilliant book for a reason. And in this landscape, It basically says, we can have a power system that manipulates and creates information in a, up is down, true is false sort of way. And that scares the hell out of me. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's happening at a global scale now with there's no boundaries between countries anymore. So it's, and then you got the cultural differences in how people just generally are brought up to view the world.
Yep.
It's just, it is freaky. It really is. But anyway, not to be too much of a downer here. So there's so we touched on 2. There were 6, and we can move quickly to the remaining 4, because I do think it's a great summary of how this cultural war 2.0 really has evolved. So the next thing was atomization and the belonging crisis, right? The feeling of community has dissolved.
Yes. Absolutely. And this is, I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm tracking this. The bottom line is that, our heart, our socio-emotional system was designed or built in the context of, us having very intimate long-term relationships with a tribe in the real world, working together, seeing each other face to face, and, in living our lives together as part of a very, very different kind of group relational arrangements than we are currently seeing. Right now, the opportunity for people to just be isolated, alone, sitting at a screen, not getting their social emotional souls nourished, is really, really, and we see a pervasive degree of loneliness and disconnection and a loss of meaningful relations across a wide variety of different domains.
Yeah, and they summarize that section by saying, to mitigate loneliness, anxiety, and other adverse conditions, people are primed to fly into the arms of others. Right, all they need is that feeling of togetherness. They just need a few convincing memes, and hence the memetic tribe.
That's right.
Boom,
Hey, these are my people. I mean, if you're alone and you're defensive, and you can find people who are also alone, defensive, but angry about the same thing, and feel connected, and then you're like, oh my gosh, that's a huge draw. Absolutely.
Yeah. No, it's sad, because I feel like your foundation's missing, but we're jumping to solve it with the next piece is globalization, the proximity crisis, right? You're removing distance between folks with conflicting views, which, going back to what I originally thought, once we kind of broke down that distance, if you will, and we can connect, we would see each other's, heartache, pain, love. We would see each other more, at the level where we default to connecting more. But apparently it's not that simple. Right.
It's definitely not that simple. Yeah. You have to actually have people be oriented toward the same goal and have some degree of interdependence toward that same goal. Right. If you just jam them together, for example, people have a confirmation bias. So this is an interesting social psych phenomenon. So if you bring people, say, who are let's say on an issue like abortion, somebody's, pro-life at a 3 level, and then somebody's pro-choice at a 7 level. And then you have them read one pro-choice article and one pro-life article that say are well done and equally well done. Well, the pro-life person reads both of those and then moves further to pro-life, because the good pro-life article they confirm their biases, and then they sort of dismiss the pro-choice article, and vice versa. So you can have two people, a 3 and a 7, and then have them read interesting, equally compelling arguments. And so you think, okay, well, they're going to move to a 6 and a 4. No, actually, they go to 2 and 8.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Because they absorb what, they want to believe, and they feel more affirmed, and you feel more justified when you're with the people that believe you. So actually exposure to information and coupled with a confirmation bias and a motivation to be right makes people cluster into groups. It's only a few kind of cognitive styles that are really have metacognition capabilities and are really open and are really taught how to embrace the other side and really try to systematically overcome these biasing tendencies. It's a difficult skill, and certainly not something that comes naturally to us.
Yeah, no, I've had this discussion with friends and family with just the technology in general, just the Googles, whatever. If you're searching to find something, if you have an idea in your head, do cell phones cause cancer? Whatever, making a simple example up. If you Google that phrase, you'll find a billion hits saying, just with content that confirms what you're looking for. Or if you search a different way, cell phones are not unsafe, or cell phones have been safe. Show me the proof, and you'll find a billion sites saying that they're safe. So it's how you actually interrogate the information, how you search for the information. And you're right. If you don't have that meta ability to kind of step outside yourself and say, wait a minute, I really want this answer to be this, but I should be looking to disprove what I was thinking or at least try to look at it neutrally and just take, not go to a 2 and an 8 and try to get to that 6 and 4, to use your prior example. But I just don't know I just don't see. Again, it takes a lot of energy, and folks just don't have the time. We're trying to get through life and bring up kids. Absolutely, and man. keep bills paid, and check all those boxes.
People have their lives to live, and this is one of the things that's really scary. Is that when you're just living I'm just living my life or whatever. Obviously, I think about these things at a meta level, but when you're just living your life, you're embedded then in these structures, and you're just dependent upon them, right? And what those of us that are looking at the meta level structures are going, oh God, these things are beginning to get serious hits. And we need to somehow figure out a culture where enough people are aware of it and enough people can ride out this flux storm. And hopefully we'll be able to find a much more stable picture of these big picture issues that can then consolidate these emerging tribal wars and get them to dance. This is Peter Limberg's term, get them to dance much more than create warfare.
Right.
And that's the dream for those of us that are seeing this and are concerned and are wondering about some solutions to where we might be going.
Right. And it's like, I see this as any problem. Sometimes, like you just alluded to, you're worried on the inside. You're living your life. You're on the inside. It's tough to identify the situation you're in when you're on the inside, right? It takes explicit effort, like what we're doing here, to step outside,
absolutely,
read an article or two, and in your case, probably 20 a day, right? You're in this world, so your general nature is to step outside, examine, step outside. So it's hard, and I think I think what's keeping me more optimistic is, and one of the motivating factors for me to even start this podcast is, I think things like this and sharing this type of content to make folks go, oh crap, I didn't even know this thing was going on. I knew the world was chaotic, and I knew we were in this weird transition state. I felt it, but I didn't know how to put a name to it. If folks like you and others and can start helping the rest of us put names to things, that helps us identify the problems, define them, then the next step, I think solutions become easier, because we're solving something instead of just what's going on. It feels wrong here, so.
That's brilliant, man. And as a psychotherapist, absolutely. I talk about awareness, acceptance, and change as the developmental process. So, so you got to become aware. Yeah. And really, I call this, what I'm hoping for in terms of my own solution, is that we can raise what I'm now calling meta-cultural consciousness. And actually, this is right off of Limberg and Barnes's article. It's sort of like it helped me see what I was seeking, which was a meta perspective across all of these, Memetic tribe battles, and each one of those tribes is a particular culture, meaning a large scale system of justification that's legitimizing what is and ought to be. And I'm trying to raise metacultural consciousness, which basically is telling people, hey, I know, you're doing your life, you're living on the ground, but there are all these meta processes that are happening. And we need as many people as possible to be able to take a begin to wonder about this meta perspective and think about the kinds of challenges that we need to become aware of and possible solutions going forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. The great summary to item 4 there. So item 5, they talk about stimulation and the sobriety crisis. The sobriety crisis reduced our agency and turned us into addicts. The whole addiction thing, right? The addiction to memes, the addiction to pervasive and what do they call it? Something with the attention economy, right? Isn't this what social media does by design? I mean, it really is, and this is where I think social media has a huge role here. And I don't know. One of the questions I had at the end here is there going to be a time when social media will be almost liable? Meaning, there's got to be some. In other words, there's plenty of psychiatrists and psychologists that are employed by social media companies. Plenty, right? We just know that for a fact, right?
Yep.
It's technology meets how the human mind works is what these platforms or these teams are composed of.
Oh, absolutely.
So, at what point are they? What point did they have to step in and say we need kind of some panel, some board, some? I'm not a big regulation fan, but at times there's times it's very well needed. How much, I guess, for this whole sobriety crisis segment, do you feel social media is mainly a big element there, and what can be done there?
Yeah, no. I certainly think that the social media creates enormous vulnerabilities for vulnerable individuals to become increasingly ill and mentally ill, in terms of neurotic and chasing the wrong kinds of things. They mention an attention economy, right?
Yep.
So I do have a message I want to get out there, but I have been very hesitant to get on Twitter. I've not done the Twitter because I've seen how dangerous Twitter is at so many different levels. Because it just yes. pulls you in, and then you want to tweet against the world and with the world and find your hits and all of, and then it's an attention economy.
Yep.
Okay. And that is not going to nourish your soul, okay? And I use that, the soul is the form of your life. And Aristotle, I mean this in an Aristotelian sense of the form of your life and whether or not it fulfills its ultimate function. And there's good reason to believe that we have particular, when you talk about, hey, self-actualized, you're saying, hey, the person had a particular unique potential and they lived their life that filled that potential. That would be filling your soul. Well, getting an enormous number of, your thing retweeted, that's going to feel a jolt of social reinforcement. But man, and especially if it's just this really, it's just this competitive game for attention in many ways. I mean,
100%.
And so this idea, in fact, this is one of the things that science does in some ways, is that it confuses our values. And so we're very vulnerable to getting confused that just, social influence is really what we value. Right.
Right.
And what we really just want is more and more influence, meaning the ability to get other people to pay attention to us in a positive way. Well, no, we're more complicated. Thank God we're actually more complicated than that, but we're easily seduced into that. And if you are, you're going to be very vulnerable to, even if you're successful doing it just for other people, that your true self inside is going to be like, well, I'm basically a fraud.
Right.
I'm manipulating myself. I'm throwing out a public image. They love me, but they actually don't even love me for who I really am. I just manipulate them into getting them to love me. So even if you're successful, you're a lot of times you're going to find yourself empty. So it's a very dangerous system.
Driven by those extrinsic values, right? If you're just only driven by those extrinsic values, right? There's a huge hole inside.
Exactly. Right? Instrumental extrinsic values do not fill your soul, and they will make you. And if that's all you pursue, you're going to wake up at 40 with just an, oh my God, my life is meaningless. Even if you're successful, potentially you'll be, so I certainly see that. And there are a lot of things that go into that, but that's certainly one of them, 100%.
Yeah. So then finally, weaponization in the warfare crisis, right? Again, I think this is, I can't take social media out of this one, either, but, I mean, so one of the quotes was, and who, I don't know who actually, James Scott, they quoted James Scott. To be honest, I don't know who, I didn't look him up, but calls these campaigns chaos operations, right? Now in my head, I think I'm just putting social media in there because it fits the profile for me, right? Understand the target audience through profiling, right? Create messages that are attuned to the trigger points of the audience, seek out real or fake incidents to weaponize and stroke outrage. Now, I know Google went through a phase of scanning. Look, as I said that, my phone just turned on. See, they're listening. Unbelievable. So I know Google went through that phase of scanning emails and putting ads, putting contextual ads into the little right bar here of Gmail. I read a bunch of stuff on it, and I haven't verified this, but I'll just quote what I heard. The whole time they knew that was going to cause a little outrage, so then they just took down the ads, but they didn't take out the scanning and profiling of you based on your content of the email. So that's still going on. So they're checking that box. Yeah. They know, right? And then you get and I know Google tried to do a social media platform with Google Plus or whatever, and that didn't really take off. But and that's what Twitter and Facebook does in terms of posting things that are going, if it bleeds, it leads, posting things that are going to make you get outraged and want to share them. I mean, because if you're spending more time on the site, then that's the whole goal. So if you really go through the whole checking all the boxes, it's exactly what social media is doing by design. And it's, once again, scary. But
yeah, no, very dangerous. And of course, right here, the weaponization we were talking also about, the fake. You can then create all sorts of different fake incidents, with the video stuff we were talking about and everything else. It just is the vulnerability we're so, we're basically awash in this. And then if somebody gets their hands on this, which obviously now there's all this information out there, and then the ability to manipulate people through that information is just outrageously real and dangerous, and it's happening. And it's one of the real vulnerabilities that this thing could go nightmarish. So and it's playing with our minds. We're overloaded with information, and we are, when we're not being mindful, we can be pretty mindless, and we can use algorithms to manipulate that mindless mind, and that's pretty scary.
Yeah It's like I said, at some point, I don't know when or how it happens, but I feel like there's really smart people on these boards, and and the problem is a lot of folks, I think I heard a quote somewhere that we're working for the Googles, we're working for the Facebooks, we're working for them, we're all we're doing is tuning their algorithms day in and day out by reacting and responding to what they put in front of us, and they just get better and better understanding how we think, why we do certain things. I mean, it's certainly a little freaky. So I guess, how does, we're hitting like almost an hour here, how does your system address this? I know your system is really in depth. It probably goes over the heads of a lot of folks, but you have a great way of bringing it down to the layman. How does your theory of knowledge system address a lot of these things we just talked about?
Yeah. So, what it does is it invites us to return to what the philosopher said, sort of had given up on. And that is, it certainly says we should at least seriously consider the pragmatic utility of very good, if not 100% perfect. I mean, I'll defend it as at the very least a very good model of knowledge, meaning that there is a way to take a coherent, big picture view of the world, and to use this to really anchor our understanding of both what is and set the stage also to be very clear about what ought to be. So if we have that model of understanding, then it's the kind of system that sets the stage for us to move from what's called the fragmented postmodern pluralism to hold a much more integrated pluralism above. So one of the foundational things that it basically says is that we are missing an integrated point that can serve as a dance floor for all these different memes. Okay. That actually then references a true, justifiable structure of understanding. And if we were able to do that, then we actually have a meta understanding to reference the debates, and then to create a context to then say, okay, well, now we can exchange ideas and at least have a shared understanding. It offers an understanding of universal values. By the way, dignity, well-being, and integrity, I could get into those, but there are I justify those as universal values, not necessarily absolutist, God-inspired values, but justifiable universal values. And it creates a model of the universe that is, I think, kind of commonsensical on the one level, but also surprisingly new. And the tree of knowledge, what it says is that the best way to think about the universe from a human perspective is to identify it as 4 different dimensions of existence. And the first dimension of existence is the material dimension, the dimension of energy, matter on a space-time grid that starts with the Big Bang. And then the second dimension of existence is life, and that's the dimension of biology, of organisms, and of cells. The third dimension is the mental dimension, and that's the dimension of the nervous system and brain and animal bodies moving around. So yes, mental for me would include things like praying mantises and bees and insects and mollusks and things like that. And also, of course, primates, all the way up to the social primates. And then ultimately, there's the cultural person landscape, which emerges because language ties our minds together. And so that becomes the 4th dimension, 4th complex adaptive dimension. And we're certainly living on that right now by justifying and talking and wondering. And what it says also is each one of these dimensions of existence emerge because of the emergence of a new information processing and communication landscape. Okay, so you have genetics coordinating cells and communicating. So you have that. And then you have the nervous system. It's an information processing system that connects cells together so that they move as a whole. And then language connects minds together that moves as a whole. And so those are each independent in different dimensions. And lo and behold, then, what would come next? Well, all of a sudden we have computers, artificial intelligence, and the internet to create this sort of meta dimension potentially. So now this is a whole new playing field of behavior, of operations, of behavioral complexities, computer stuff that's allowing us to do. So what I'm saying is, hey, there's this 5th dimension that is potentially emerging. And in fact, actually, there's even mathematical models that identify what's called a complex singularity that some people at least call, that's going to emerge somewhere between 2027 and 2045. There's these very interesting, consistent models of evolving complexity that say there will be a maximum point. It's a lot of people debate exactly what it means, but there's a thing. Ray Kurzweil, the co-founder of Google, I'm not sure exactly what his exact title was, but he was a futurist. He labeled it the singularity. Right. There've been a lot of mathematical modeling around that thing. So for me, what I'm saying, what I use my model to do is say, hey, there really is a new 5th dimension of existence that is starting to emerge around us. And so I can say, hey, I can use my model to describe that. And I can say it's going to cause lots of uncertainty. Every time one of these new dimensions emerges, there's a lot of uncertainty. And we can then model the kind of way in which we can envision it going well if we get our human values right. If we understand dignity, well-being, and integrity across sort of the globe and hold that, and also understand the need for individual freedom and enormous amount of diversity. And if we can hold those kinds of issues together in the right dialectic and have a structure of knowledge that allows us to understand our nature, understand technology, understand the cosmos that we're in, then we'll be much more likely to build an integrated pluralistic system with this internet that fosters adaptive behavior in this new landscape. And then if that's done, we can have an enormous amount of control and really guide ourselves to nourish our lives in a fulfilling way. That's my real hope. At the same time, if it's not done well, as we've seen about all the dangers and all the chaos that's happening, God only knows how this thing might evolve. So that's what my system does, is it tries to give you an opportunity to have this sort of metacultural consciousness that says, hey, let me introduce to you the idea of the 5th dimension. It's happening around us. It's the thing that comes after humans. It's kind of weird, but it's happening whether you're aware of it or not. But if you become aware of it, then maybe we'll be more likely to become aware of the solutions and how to be a part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem.
Well, I guess we'll end with this one last question, because that's a great summary, by the way. That was I think that was. I mean, again, I think it's going to go over some of the heads of a lot of us, myself included. But I think how how do you go from your theory? Is there any what do you feel like the next steps are? I mean, so theories are good, but they need to serve a foundation for some kind of implementation, something you can tangible that we can do with that. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so lots of different thoughts. Like I need help with marketing. I'm not a marketer. So you need somebody who understands the attention landscape, right. And you need to have somebody that actually understands how to speak to people on the ground and get them excited. I am a clinical psychologist. I'm in the midst of doing a blog series on depression. And actually my wife, I have a way of representing my theory, by the way, in a coin. I'm not going to get into that. But I'm on the ground, and my area of expertise, is mental health in terms of my pragmatic reality. Sort of like, okay, yeah. So how do you live a fulfilling life in this crazy world? And I look at it both through the lens. On the negative side, my particular area of expertise is with depression. So sort of depression is obviously a huge current concern. And on the positive, I've worked very hard to define what the core of well-being is. What is it? What does psychological well-being mean? And actually, my wife was telling me the other night, she's like, well, Greg, you should write a book that just says flip the coin from depression to well-being. And actually, over the last 2 days, I'm like, yeah, actually, that people can actually get her. I talked to my 14-year-old daughter, and she's like, yeah, that makes sense.
Well, it's a cool visual.
I like,
yeah,
sort of just flip the coin from. So those are the kinds of things that we need. We need sort of engaging. There are people that need to understand how to engage in music that get people aware of this, and people need to start community movements. And I'm in terms of my pragmatics, I'm an individual psychotherapist, so it's like, yes, how do you talk to yourself in the situation that you find yourself in? How do you relate to yourself, relate to others in a way that moves you away from depressive cycles and into flourishing cycles? How do you flip that coin? And so, we need coordinated efforts toward, these universal values, recognizing the very chaotic situation. It's going to take many, many people with many, many talents to do it. It needs, I can contribute to this very big abstract picture. And in terms of the pragmatics of it, I can contribute this sort of mental health pragmatics piece. I need to connect with people that understand marketing, with people who understand economics, with people who understand sociology. I'm certainly trying to do that. That's what my theory of knowledge blog is. But it's a complicated problem. I'll be doing my small part in it, and hopefully we'll get lots of people together that can do their parts and make this thing unfold in a productive way.
Well, my only part is just have conversations like this, and at the same time satisfying my own curiosity and and getting smarter on this stuff. Is hopefully others will be hearing this and saying, "Holy crap, that made a lot of sense."
Yeah, man. We got to raise the metacultural consciousness, man. So that's exactly what I feel like this kind of conversation does, and that's definitely part of the solution.
I'm gonna ask my wife that this afternoon. I'm gonna say, hey, Greg and I spoke. She'll say, how was the podcast? I'm like, honey, you need to raise your what do you call it? Metacultural consciousness.
Metacultural consciousness.
I probably should practice it first, but yeah.
Well, actually, I'm playing off of that because ultimately, in my model, the energy is the most fundamental substance, if you want to say that there is one. So if we want to turn energy into metacultural consciousness, which actually now is, if those are capitalized, then that's energy equals MC squared. So I'll play off of Einstein there and utilize that. So we want to turn energy into metacultural consciousness.
Oh, very cool. Like it. Well, Greg, I do really appreciate your time, especially here on Father's Day. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
I'm glad I could come in and share some thoughts, and I appreciate the stimulating conversation. I want to give a shout out to Peter Limberg and who I know, and Conor Barnes, who I don't, but their article on Memetic tribes and Culture War 2.0 obviously served as the ground for this, and I know him, and I'm really appreciative of his insights there.
Yeah, I did started following him a little bit on YouTube. Limberg, it's some pretty cool stuff. Oh, you know him personally? That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we don't go super far back, but I was on his podcast, and we've been staying in touch ever since.
Very cool. Excellent. Hey, Greg, again, thank you so much. This is awesome. I will send you a link and all that when this gets published.
I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope you have a good Father's Day also.
Thank you. See you, Greg.
Alrighty. Take care.
Bye. That is it. Thanks for listening. Appreciate it. Special thanks to Conor Barnes and Peter Limberg for the article that we based the entire episode on. I'll have their Twitter handles in the show notes. Please give those guys a follow and look them up. A lot of interesting content these guys are producing. So, all right. Thanks for listening again. See ya.